מה אתה עושה?
רק תגיד את התאריך וזמן המראיין.
מה התאריך היום? 22?
כן.
It's July 22nd, 2013. I'm interviewing Marlin Levin here in Jerusalem. Why don't we start with where you were born, where your family was from. Get a little bit of a picture about your background.
Wow. I was born in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. My parents were also born in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, in the United States. And my grandparents came from Lithuania and from Russia. My grandfather came from Lithuania and Pasvilas, and my grandmother came from Elizabethgrad. Elizabethgrad was the place where the pogromim started in 1882 or 3. And as a result of that, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, went to the United States, left for the United States. And do you want to hear the story about my grandmother?
Yes.
Well, my grandmother didn't want to leave Elizabethgrad because she wanted to be with her mother and father. But my grandfather wrote my grandmother that if she didn't come to the United States, he would divorce her. So she picked up her 2 little children, aged 6 and 4, and she took them on a long voyage to the United States. When she got to the port in Germany to go to the States, she had lost her tickets for the ship. And she didn't know what to do, and she only knew Yiddish and Russian. And she walked around and she saw a shop where there was a Jewish, I don't know whether it was a baker or what kind of a shop it was. But she went into the shop and she told him in Yiddish, he was Jewish, and she told him in Yiddish that she had lost her tickets and could she have some money to buy tickets to go on. And he said, well, what do you have for collateral? And she said she had her silver candlesticks. She would leave them with him. He gave her the money, and she got the tickets. She went to the United States, and when she got to Harrisburg, she sent him the money, and lo and behold, a few months later, all the candlesticks came from the Jewish baker, and they were in perfect shape. Well, that was my grandmother. My grandmother was a wonderful person, and I grew up there in Harrisburg. There's not much to tell. I had a normal...
Well, what year did they come to the States?
They came to the States about 1882 or 3, just after the pogrom in Elizabethgrad. And
why'd they choose Harrisburg?
what?
Why'd they choose Harrisburg?
I don't know, but I think they must have had Landsman there. And he was looking for Landsman. They arrived at Baltimore. My grandfather arrived in Baltimore, and that's where my grandmother came. And so they went to Harrisburg. And that's where I grew up. I had a wonderful education in Harrisburg. It was public school, high school. And that was it.
Was there any kind of, I mean, there wasn't a day school yet there, but was there some kind of...
I had very little Jewish education. There was a Talmud Torah, and I used to go to the Talmud Torah to learn Hebrew, to study. And I used to go every afternoon from high school, from public school and high school. And that was it.
Growing up, what did you think you were going to... What did you think you wanted to be, or where did you want to go?
I knew from the very beginning, from the age of 8, I wanted to write and be a journalist. And it was fortified by the fact that in school, whenever I wrote something, the teacher would call on me to read what I wrote. And it was... I remember once the teacher gave me in 6th grade, she gave me she gave us all a lesson to write a story about a famous person. Well, I didn't know whom, I thought maybe I'd do something on a baseball player. And my mother had bought me an encyclopedia, a one volume encyclopedia, only a few weeks before. And I was looking through the encyclopedia to try to find somebody to write about, a famous person. And I came to the page where it was written about Mozart. And I didn't know who Mozart was. And I was very interested in the fact that he had so many names. I forgot all the names. And so I sat and I wrote a story about Amadeus Mozart. And I took the little essay to school, and she called on me to write, to read the story about Mozart. So I read it off, and she gave me a top mark for it. And from that time on, I wanted to be a journalist. I wanted to be a writer. And everything I wrote seemed to work. The teachers would call on me to read my stories.
What year were you born?
I was born October 21st, 1921. I'm almost 92.
And you were a baseball fan?
I was a baseball fan.
What team?
I loved the Phillies. Near Philadelphia.
How far is Harrisburg from Philadelphia?
100 miles, I think.
Shalom.
Was there in Harrisburg? Was there a kosher butcher, and or did you need to get meat from?
There was a kosher butcher. Yeah, there were. Yes, I forget the name of the man. And we had a kosher butcher. We had a kosher baker. It was a very strong Jewish community, although there were only 5,000 Jews in the town. But we had 3 synagogues. And I attended every synagogue. I started off, my father took me to the Orthodox synagogue. And then we changed and went to conservative synagogue. And then we changed again and went to the Reform synagogue. And I grew up knowing all the different movements in Judaism. And I had a teacher who was a Haredi, a Hebrew teacher to study for my bar mitzvah. Well, he even taught me to read Yiddish. And I gave my bar mitzvah speech in Yiddish.
When you finished high school, what was your plan, or what did you decide to do?
Well, let's talk a little bit about the first years and my my teens. I had joined the Boy Scouts, and they were located in the Reform Synagogue, and I used to study for my Boy Scout movements, Boy Scout, what they call them, the Boy Scout merit badges.
Yeah.
And I got enough merit badges to become an Eagle Scout. I was one of the very few in Harrisburg altogether to reach that grade, Eagle Scout. And while I was in the Boy Scout movement, I heard about a movement called Young Judea, which was in the conservative synagogue. So I joined both the Boy Scouts and the Young Judea. I became very active in Young Judea. I put out their newspaper. We had a newspaper for the club. And eventually, I was given a scholarship to go to the first Young Judea camp in America. That was in New Hampshire. I forget the name of the town anymore.
That's before Tel Yehuda, right?
What?
It's before Tel Yehuda. That was the.
Oh yes, much better. This is 1941, and they sent. I joined a group of about 35 Young Judea leaders in America, and there I learned about Zionism. Of course, I knew about Zionism in Young Judea, but there I really heard lectures and understood the whole movement, the Zionist movement. And I even signed up to come to Palestine. But by then I was already in university, my first year university, and I couldn't go because America was already brought into the war in 1941.
When you finished high school, you went straight to university?
No, I worked a year. My mother, we were not a very wealthy family, although my father worked during the entire Depression, and he made a good living.
What did he do?
He was a traveling salesman, and I didn't have much of a father because he was always on the road traveling from Monday through Friday. And I was brought up mainly by my mother. Well, he was a traveling salesman. He sold pots and pans in department stores. And my mother insisted I go to synagogue every Friday night, every Saturday, and I was brought up by my mother. I had a sister. I have a sister, and she's younger than I am. Well, at this camp in New Hampshire, I really learned about Zionism. And I realized that if we don't have a Jewish state, it would be very bad for the Jews. And then we had the Shoah, but I didn't know too much about the Shoah. Anyway, after the World War, then I learned about it.
Where'd you go to college?
I went to Temple University and I studied journalism. I became the editor-in-chief of the newspaper. We had a newspaper. We had a thrice weekly, 3 times a week. We had a newspaper. And I was the editor and had a wonderful college education. In my junior year, I had volunteered for the Army because as a volunteer I could finish my junior year, and so I joined the volunteers, and in 1943 I was taken into service. It was interesting. As a soldier, I went to cryptography school in the Army. There are a lot of stories to go with that. The officer who interviewed me, let me get my thoughts together. I was taken into service near Baltimore, and I forget the name of the Camp Meade, I think its name was.
That's for
Fort Meade.
For your basic training? For
my basic training. And after basic training, the officer asked me what I would like to do. I was in the Signal Corps. And I said, well, I don't know. What is there? He said, I don't have much for you because I had a pretty high IQ. He said, I don't have much for you. He said, oh, wait a minute, there is something here, cryptography. Would you like to go to cryptography school? I said, yes, I would. And they sent me off to the boondocks in New Jersey in a camp. It's hardly known. And there I studied cryptography. And I was sent finally to Europe. I sailed to Europe, to England. We were rocketed by the Nazis there, by the Germans, in near Southampton, near Chichester in Hampshire County, in England, and in 1944 of June, we sailed to Normandy. It was 3 weeks after the D-Day. We went to Normandy, and we traveled all over Europe. I was then part of the communications headquarters of General Eisenhower. And
did you ever meet him?
I never met him, but I knew his chief of staff. And for a while, I was in the in the Eisenhower's headquarters doing cryptography, and enciphering messages and sending messages to all sorts of people, enciphering the messages and so forth. And it was a very interesting time. From Normandy we went to Paris, and I was stationed in Versailles. That was Eisenhower's Advanced Communications Headquarters. And it was a very interesting time. And then we went on to northern France, and finally we went into Germany in the day that Roosevelt died. I think it was April 13th, or 12th, 13th. And we went into Germany. and I ended up in Fulda, Germany. After VE Day, they sent me to Marseille in France, and from Marseille, I was sent to Manila. It was a 32-day trip from Marseille to Manila on a luxury liner. Well, I was on this luxury liner for troops. It was turned into a troop ship. And I didn't have much to do. We were sort of bored. So I went to the captain of the ship, the officer of the ship, and I said, I'd like to put out a newspaper because I see you have a printing press on the ship. So he said, okay, get yourself a staff and you will put out a newspaper for the ship. Anyway, so I gathered a group, and we wrote stories, and that's the way we spent the trip to Manila. That's a long trip through the Panama Canal. Once we got close to Manila, the radio officer of the ship called me and told me that he just heard a report on Swiss radio that an atom bomb had been dropped on Japan. So I said, get out your biggest type and put the headlines in red and say atom bomb dropped on Japan. So I think it was the first of any newspaper anywhere in the world to report, because then it was only a rumor. Nobody knew for sure, but I took it for sure. Anyway, we got to Manila. From Manila, we got to Japan. On the way to Japan, we were on a small ship. We got into a typhoon. And the ship, we had a convoy of 12 ships and only 8 arrived. I don't know, we don't know what happened to the other 4. They must have been sunk in the typhoon. This was in the South China Sea. And so we got to Japan, and I was stationed in 8th Army Headquarters, Eichelberger's 8th Army Headquarters. From Japan, after VE Day, in December, VE Day, our group was put on the ship, and we sailed to go home.
After VJ Day or?
VJ Day, after VJ Day. And we got on the ship and we sailed home back to, and I had my first airplane trip from California back to Baltimore, where we were
Did you go to Hawaii or to go to California?
We went to California, San Francisco, and and in Baltimore, I think it was Fort Meade. I went to my officer. It was about December 30th or 31st. I said, I'd like to go home to Harrisburg. I'd like leave to go home to Harrisburg because on the 1st, it's my mother and father's silver wedding anniversary. So he said, okay. So he gave me leave to go home. And I went home, and I didn't tell my parents that I was coming. And when I got home, my mother opened the door, and she said to me, "What would you like to eat?" I hadn't seen her for 2.5 years. Anyway, then I went back to Temple University, and I finished my senior year.
Before you go on to that, I had
Yes, I want to put something to ask you. When you arrived in Europe as a Jewish soldier, what was the first meeting, the first time that you meet a Jewish survivor?
You know, I handled top intelligence messages in Europe. We would get reports, citizen trips. They were called citizen trips. Situation reports from our agents working inside Germany, inside lines. I never once read a report about anything Jewish or the Shoah or anything. I never once saw anything.
So when you were there, you had no
I had
idea.
no contact with the Jews.
No one? You never?
No one.
But did you have any idea that anything was going on in terms of?
We knew that Jews were being persecuted, but that was general.
May I interrupt?
Yes.
This was very early. Nobody knew.
Nobody.
He was still in the army.
But
No, but even by
He was
by
still
VE
war.
Day already. By VE Day.
But I was in Japan.
When after VE Day though, you went to Japan, but even as the war, so no one.
it's amazing.
That's amazing.
In 44 in Europe, as American soldier, and you know nothing about the Holocaust.
We for a while, sometimes we were taken from one city to another in France or Germany in boxcars, and those were some of the boxcars I think that were taken by the American soldiers, and we rode in these boxcars, and those were some of the boxcars I think that took Jews to the camps.
Wow.
They were called 40 at 8, 40 soldiers and 8 horses.
So. Just
When I first knew about the Shoah, but really knew them, is when I covered the Eichmann trial. I covered it as a journalist, as a correspondent.
Wow. Okay.
One more thing. When you was in Europe, you already have your camera with you?
I had my camera.
So you all
I
this
took
traveling-
pictures. I took pictures of my fellow soldiers and so forth.
And where is all the pictures now? Here?
They're in the room.
That's history. Wow.
When did you get into photography? You already from?
I got into photography when I was 8 years old. My father had bought a box camera, and I still have the box camera. And I would take pictures. Wherever I went, I took pictures.
Wow. Okay. That's fascinating. Back to you come back from Japan. You said you took your first airplane.
United Airlines, I think it was.
Wow.
We went all across the United States to Baltimore.
And when were you discharged from?
In 1946, January 46, the year, I don't remember the exact date. But it was
How many
January.
years were you in service for?
From May of 1943 to January 46.
And then you went back to school.
Went back to the university, and from the university while I was in university, I was offered a job with a radio station connected to the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I was the editor of news for the radio station, WFIL in Philadelphia. And in the meantime, I'd met Betty in Harrisburg, just in January of 46, January 13th, I met Betty.
You just came back from, you just been discharged, you came back. How'd you meet her?
Betty was teaching Hebrew in a day school in Harrisburg. And
How'd you meet her?
how'd I meet her is a story. I was 2 weeks back from the Army. And I wanted to have some, I wanted to talk to a friend of mine. And I said, let's go to the movies. And so we went to the movies. And I said, after the movies, let's go have a cup of coffee and we'll talk about our Army experiences. So there was only one cafeteria that was open in Harrisburg at that late at night. So when we got to the cafeteria, my friend looked through the window and he saw two girls sitting there. And they were the only ones in the cafeteria. It was close to midnight. And he said to me, I know the one girl, I'll sit next to her. You sit next to the other girl. He said, I don't know the other girl. So I said, okay. So I sat down. It was Betty. I looked at her eyes and I said, wow. And I said to her, the first thing I said to her, didn't ask her her name and didn't ask her where she's from, nothing. I just said, I knew a trick in the Army and I'll see whether you can solve it. So I showed her this trick. It was a match trick. And she said, all right. So I showed her the match trick. I said, nobody has ever been able to understand that trick. Within about a half a minute, she solved the trick. I said, that's the girl for me. She'll tell you her story, but she came from New York, from Brooklyn.
So you already met
So
her.
I went home and I told my mother, I said, Mom, I think I know the girl I want to marry. It took me 1.5 years after that.
So then that was your last year of college then, that year.
My last year of university, I had been the editor of WFIL News. And around Christmas time, they said they didn't need me anymore. So besides, I said I wanted to leave Philadelphia and go to New York because Betty was then in New York. And I wanted to be close to her. So I looked around for a job and finally found a job with Women's Wear Daily. But before that, the president of the university called me in and said, Marlin, you were doing a good job on the newspaper. I'd like you to go to New York and talk to the publisher of Time magazine. He said, I'll give you a recommendation.
The publisher then was Henry Luce?
Harry Luce, yeah. So he had worked as one of the businessmen on on the original Time magazine. He said, I know Luce very well. He said, you go to New York and you'll get a job with Henry Luce. But I said, no, I don't want to work for a magazine. I don't want to work for I want to work for a newspaper. I want daily experience. He said, okay. Well, so I then went to New York and I got this job with Women's Wear Daily, and I was assistant fur editor of Women's Wear. I didn't know the first thing about furs.
This down in the garment district?
What?
This in the garment district were you based?
Yeah. Well, it was a national paper, Women's Wear Daily. So they say where money is the Bible, Women's Wear Daily is the Bible.
Money is God.
Where money is God, women's wear daily is the Bible. That's what they used to say. Anyway, I covered it for Women's Wear Daily, and I used to meet Betty for lunch and that was it.
Were you still
Then,
involved in Young Judea at all?
what?
Were you still connected to Young Judea?
Yeah, I had very strong connections with Young Judea, and I once went. One day I went to the editor of the Women's Wear Daily, the fur editor. I said, "You know what? I think I'd like to go to Palestine." He said, "Are you crazy?"
That
So-
just out of nowhere you said that?
Well, no, we had talked about it. Betty and I had talked about it. And I said, I'm going to go to Palestine. I want to go to Palestine. And because I was reading all the time in the New York Herald Tribune reports from Palestine, from Jerusalem, by Homer Biggert. He was a terrific correspondent for the Herald Tribune. And I liked his reports very much. He was very fair and straight and very accurate about it. And I said I would like to go and work like Biggert in Jerusalem. He said, "Are you crazy? You're going to Palestine now?" He offered me 50% more salary. I was making a good salary in those days. And he said, "No, I want to go to Palestine." So Betty and I had decided we were going to go to Jerusalem.
Wait, I have a question. How did you know anybody that was in Palestine?
I didn't know anybody there. I didn't even know that there was an English newspaper
We
here.
had some
No.
I just wanted to go, be
Well,
there.
we had some friends. And that's
Oh
why
yeah,
we're
I
here.
had two
Helen
friends.
went.
I had a friend who was going with us.
Well,
And-
how did all this, like, here you are.
well,
you're
I had
not-
the Zionist background,
I understand.
and when I went to the camp in New Hampshire, I actually signed up to go. So, but I didn't go then because of the war, and so this was the opportunity, and I wanted to be a journalist in Palestine.
Did you think you were gonna just go and be a correspondent and then come
I
back?
I
or-
tried to find a job to be assigned to go there, and the editor, the fur editor in the Women's Wear Daily told me, well, when you get there, you can send us reports about the fur trade, but there was no fur trade there.
There was one shop, Schwartz's. That's his cell phone number.
Interested, but
Well, we joined Plugal Aliyah.
I started the Zionist. I joined a Zionist movement in Philadelphia called Plugat Aliyah, and these were people who had already made Aliyah. So
But it was later.
everything came together: my journalism, my Zionism, and
And there was also the
my wife, who wanted to very much be there.
Were you married yet?
Well, yeah, we got married. We got married in June 22nd, 1947. 6 weeks later, we got on a ship and went to Palestine.
But you also have the GI Bill. That's another reason why we were able to come.
Yeah, I had an excuse to get into British Palestine. It was run by the Mandate, and my excuse was to study in Palestine. But I really wanted to be a journalist there, and I wanted to send back reports from there.
Meaning, by going to study, it made it legal, or it made it.
Made it legal. Yeah.
What did your parents say when you told them that you wanted to go to Palestine?
I had very little reaction from my parents. She felt, my mother, I don't think I ever had any reaction from them. If she felt that I was already a war veteran and I was a journalist, so this was, my mother didn't react. My parents didn't react. My mother cried when I left for Palestine.
I imagine.
She had good reason to, because here there was turmoil.
So.
And I wanted to be, my main reason for going as a Zionist was to write from here. And I didn't even know that, I said before that I didn't know that there was a newspaper in English.
So how'd you get ready? What did you just, said, okay, we're gonna go? Was there anybody to tell? Was there anybody to coordinate with? Did you know where you were gonna live?
We
What'd
had,
you bring with
Abe
you?
Harmon was,
We came as students.
we came as,
They were, the only people who can get into Palestine at that time were certificates. Now, we weren't gonna take a certificate, we weren't gonna get it, of course. And the excuse was that under the GI Bill, he had the right to study anywhere he wanted to. So we came as students, and there was an organization here to accept, to meet us at the ship and all that, and to register for studying at the university as foreign students.
What did you know what to take with you? Did you know what
yeah, we took, one day we spent in New York getting as much equipment as we could. What did we buy?
Suitcases.
What? Klim.
Suitcases.
Suitcases.
Yeah, then with your father, we went to get pots and pans.
Yeah, we took household goods, books,
A radio.
a radio, two-way radio.
What kind of radio?
What was that? Holocrafter radio. I took it because I wanted to hear news on shortwave. And so we got the radio, and we bought a lot of Klim, dried milk.
Oh, that was the second time.
Oh, that was the second time.
Did you bring your camera?
Oh,
Yeah, sure. I had a camera and I had my typewriter,
And a broken down
a
typewriter.
broken down
No
typewriter.
handle.
It didn't even have a handle. I had to have a rope to hold the camera, the typewriter.
So you come by boat, I take it.
We came on the Marine Carp, and it was a stinking World War II ship. It was terrible. The smells on the ship were terrible. It was run by the American Export Line and under military administration. And I slept in the hold with 100 men. And Betty slept upstairs.
No, I was in the hole too.
Oh, you were in the hold too, with about 25 women. And we would meet on top deck. And we would sit there till late at night because of the odors on the ship were terrible. We couldn't eat the food because it wasn't kosher. And Betty's parents arranged for food for us. They prepared all kinds of food that we took with us.
Took salami.
Salami, yeah.
And then, when did you get here? When did you get to Palestine?
August 31st, 1947. We got here. And when we got to Haifa port, there were underground charges were exploded under the ship, and the whole ship would rise up out of the water. We didn't understand what was going on, but we later learned that this was to discourage illegal immigrants from jumping off the ship and getting into port.
So what happened?
When I got to Haifa, I got a call to come to top deck from a British officer. The British had meantime boarded the ship, and he saw me, and I went over to him, and he said, "Are those your boxes?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "When we left New York, we gave all our things in our apartment to Santini Brothers to pack for us and to ship to the port in New York." And I said, I went over and I saw the boxes, and printed on the boxes were stenciled were words like bombs, fuses. I said, "What do you have in those boxes?" I said, my clothes, our clothes, our pots and pans, our books. That's all we have. So around me were several soldiers with guns waiting for the boxes to be opened. And so he ordered the boxes to be opened. And when they opened them, they said, well, they saw that there were pots and pans and books. The Santini brothers, the packing company in New York, had used surplus ammunition boxes to pack this stuff that they had bought from the American Army. And he looked at me and said, "That's some joke."
There's a picture of that in the catalog I gave you.
Okay.
And it shows you bombs, fuses.
What that was all that there was a lot happening in Palestine.
You're
right
telling
around then.
me.
That was the Exodus and the whole sergeants.
Yeah, that was when the officers were hanged, the British officers were hanged.
You were still in the States when that happened. You were
Yeah.
following that.
Yeah, well, yeah. That happened in 46, I think.
It happened in
Well,
June.
No, it's in the end of July.
It was in June,
It's a month,
wasn't it?
3 weeks before. Can I ask you something? Can you describe the moment that you put your foot on the Holy Land? Can you tell us the feeling? What was it for you?
I thought it was a great adventure. We weren't scared. We were just for a few days we spent in Haifa, and then we took a bus to go to Jerusalem. And on the way, they threw rocks at us. The Arabs threw rocks at us, and I think they even shot at us. But I'd been through the war in Europe and Japan, so it didn't mean that very much to me. That was a very small battle here. Nothing great like the war in Europe. So I was pretty macho, you know. I felt very, very strong.
And then you came.
And we got to Jerusalem. A few days after we arrived in Jerusalem, the first Saturday night, Betty and I wanted to see what the town would look like, and so we walked downtown. And when we were on Jaffa Road in Jerusalem, Betty met a colleague of hers from the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York who happened to be here. And
Do you remember his name? Morty Chertoff.
Morty Chertoff, yeah. That's right, Morty. And Morty said to me, "What do you do?" I said, "I'm a journalist." He took me by the shoulder like this. He said, "Come with me." I said, "Where are we going?" He said, "You'll see." He took me up to the office of the Palestine Post, introduced me to the editor, Gershon Hagron, And Gershon was reading copy, and he had glasses like on his nose, and a long cigarette, a lorgnette. You know, he was smoking a cigarette. He said, "Who are you?" So I told him who I was. He says, what did you do in America? I told him my background. He says, and then he looks at me and he says, "Get into the office and start working." I said, "Wait a minute, I'm only here a few days. I'd like to see the country." He said, "How long do you want?" I said, "Well, 3 weeks." He said, "Okay, in 3 weeks come back and get to work." That was it. That was the story of I joined the Palestine Post, and I was a sub-editor of the Post, and
What, did you go touring first?
Yeah, sure, had a long tour. Betty will tell you about the tour.
Why, you're tired?
Yeah. We went from kibbutz to kibbutz to kibbutz, and the Jewish Agency had mapped out a whole itinerary for us up in northern Palestine. And we would go from kibbutz to kibbutz to kibbutz and stay over one night everywhere. We would go, I had my typewriter with me. I never wrote a single word the whole time, but I had my typewriter. And we would go, and we traveled on buses and on donkey carts. We had a good time. And we saw all of northern Israel, northern Palestine, that was then. We got as far as Metula, and then we came back to Jerusalem. And when I got back to Jerusalem, I went to work on the Post as one of the editors. And we had some writers from Germany who had come originally from Germany, and their English was very bad, and I had to put their stories into good English, which I knew very well.
So this is now 1947. You're covering
February 1st, 1948. I was sitting.
Wait, what about the UN? The UN vote in November. Did you cover the UN vote, the UNSCOP?
In November 29th.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving weekend.
Thanksgiving, we went to Meir Shafeo. Betty wanted to meet a group that had been with Hadassah. And we went up to Meir Shafeo. And at Meir Shafeo, they announced
Where is that?
near Zichron Yaakov. And we were there, and we learned about the UN decision to...
we were listening to the radio all day.
Yeah. And in the morning, we got up very early, and we had the whole group of children. It was a children's village, and which was partly sponsored by Junior Hadassah. And that's why Betty was there. But she'll tell you about that. Anyway, so I took pictures, and one of the pictures is in the album of a group of his children standing around and having the flag raised. The Jewish flag. It wasn't an Israeli flag, it was a Jewish flag then. And then I came back to Jerusalem, and I went back to work. What I wanted to tell you was in 1948, of February 1st, I went to work that night, and we had received threats from I don't know where, that we would be attacked. And sure enough, that night, February 1st, a truckload of dynamite went off in Hassolel Street, outside Gershon Agron's office. And the whole building went up in flames, and we were bombed.
You were in the building?
I was in the building. I was sitting in the newsroom. That night, it so happens, I had changed my seat by sheer luck. The person who sat there had gone to Tel Aviv or somewhere, and I had changed my seat because I didn't like sitting opposite big windows. My seat faced big windows, and I didn't like it. So I changed, and I sat in the corner of the office. And sure enough, the bomb went off. The truckload of dynamite went off, and the glass shattered. The lights went out. The flames come up, and I had just finished writing a story. I had done a survey of the bombings in Jerusalem that day. There was terror every night, practically. So, and I just finished the story. I was just taking the paper out of the typewriter when boom! All I heard was, I was so close to the bomb, all I heard was shh. It was just and glass flew, and I saw people being hurt. I wasn't touched because I was sitting in the corner there. The next night, I went back to where I was sitting, and I saw that a big piece of iron had come through the window and was lodged in the wall behind where my head would have been. It's one of the risks you take.
What happened with the newspaper that...
We still published that night.
I think the headline was something about the truth. The truth is out or something.
The truth is, I have a copy of that paper.
How'd you publish?
We went to another press. Our editor, Gershon Agron, happened to be in Tel Aviv that night. He wasn't in his office. If he had been in an office, he would have been killed. And so Ted Laurie was then the acting editor, and he published the paper, just a one-page paper at another press in Jerusalem.
Well, weren't they mimeographed copies or something?
What?
I think they were mimeographed copies, weren't they?
They were
mimeographed copies?
No.
What you got to be thinking at this point.
During the War of Independence, we went to work every night. There are plenty of stories about it. Anyway, we would go to work. We were very hungry because we had very little food in those days. And we went to work and we were very hungry. So what we did was we would tear pages out of American magazines. We had a lot of American magazines. We'd tear pages out of the magazines with food on them, food advertisements, and we'd stick it up on the bulletin board. And every night we'd come and say, that's what we're going to eat. One night I came and I saw a picture of a huge ham. And I said, wait a minute, take that down. That's not kosher. So they took it down. Anyway.
At this point, though, I gotta
We
imagine...
would sometimes we would sit on the floor to type our stories because of the bombing. We would be bombed all the. There was a workshop close to our building. They were making ammunition for the Haganah, and it was very close to our building. And apparently the Arabs knew about it, and they were shooting shells at our building. And because we couldn't sell the newspaper we couldn't get the newspaper out of Jerusalem. It was a siege. We were under siege those days. We would stack up the newspapers that we had printed up against the windows, and they absorbed all the shrapnel from the bombs, from the 25-pounder shells. And I would sit on the floor sometimes under the desks and type my stories.
Were you having any second thoughts at this point that, I don't know, was this what you had expected when you...
No, I didn't expect that at all. But there occasionally I figured maybe it would be better if we left. But I couldn't leave then because what was happening, and I was a journalist, so this was a place to be. Jerusalem was a place to be.
Tell about your mother's letter.
Oh, yeah. There were a lot of young Americans living in Jerusalem in those days, rabbis in training.
They were students.
There were student rabbis there, and many of them got letters from their families, say, you better come home now. Father's having a heart attack, mother's depressed, come home. Get all kinds. I never got a letter in those days. And I was wondering whether maybe I should go home and for my parents' sake. One day, on one of the convoys, a mail came in to Jerusalem, and I did get a letter from my mother. And I opened it, and I thought maybe this would be an invitation to come back to the States. And she wrote the following: now is not the time to leave Jerusalem, even if you only have bread and water to eat. And we only had bread. We had very little bread and very little water. And she said, I took the letter and I showed it to a Gershon Agron, who was the editor then. And he showed it to Ben Gurion, and Ben Gurion sent my mother a wonderful letter praising her for her courage. That letter, I think Ben Gurion read it into the Knesset files or whatever they have.
Did you start courses did you end up going to Hebrew University?
We went through several times, but then the university on Mount Scopus was closed, and never studied more than a few sessions.
Did you know, I think her name at the time was Tzipi Borowski.
Sure. I knew her from the Young Judea in America. Yeah, she was with us in the camp in New Hampshire, in the Zionist camp. By the way, that was the very first Zionist camp in America, and out of that came the Brandeis. Because
I know a lot of the people that were here at the time were also part-time, got involved in Haganah or various other machtarot.
I was built in kasher l'sherut. I was not allowed. I was refused volunteering for the army because of one reason or another, health reasons. And the army wouldn't take me. So one day, someone came to our apartment and asked me, "Are you Marlin Levin?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, you had experience in the American Army as a cryptographer?" I said, "Yes." He said, "I would like you to join the Army with the rank of major, go to Tel Aviv, and we only have one other person in Israel who has the same experience as you do as a cryptographer. I said, oh no, wait a minute, I'm not going back into uniform. I just got out of uniform. I said, but if you'd like me to, I'm ready to work in the Haganah as a civilian. So he said, okay. And he arranged for me to go to Schneller, which was Haganah headquarters in Jerusalem. This was in 1948. And every day I would go to the Schneller, and then from Schneller I would go to the Palestine Post and work on the Post. I was working, they asked me to set up the security for Haganah headquarters there, because the security was very bad. And I had my experience in Eisenhower's headquarters, so I knew what security was. So I started to arrange for the security. One day, the radio operator at Haganah headquarters came to me and said, I have a message here, but I can't understand what it is. He had written down what he heard on the monitor on the radio, and it was from the Arab army in Jordan. Was it called the Arab Legion? And I saw it, and I saw it was in cipher. And I worked for about 10 minutes, and I worked out the cipher. It was simple cipher. And I passed it on, and it was an operational message for the Jordanians to attack at a certain point. I gave it to him, and he kept bringing me messages all the time. He kept monitoring their army radio, or police radio, army radio, whatever it was. And these were all operational messages. They were about ready to attack here and there, everywhere. And I remember once especially, I got a message saying that they were going to attack Neve Yaakov and Atarot. And I said, you better get this to Haganah headquarters. So he did. And I think as a result of that, they took out the people from Neve Yaakov. And also I had the message about Ramat Rachel, the kibbutz, Ramat Rachel. There were attacks on Ramat Rachel, 3 attacks, I think. So if you go back to the beginning, I get into the army, I become a cryptographer, I go to France, I work in Eisenhower's headquarters, I come here, and maybe it was Bashert that I do that.
Wow. Were you still taking pictures at the time?
Yeah, I would take pictures. I took them for myself, really. Just for fun.
How was your radio working out?
The radio, yeah. One day, our Arab landlord, we had a wonderful Arab landlord. He was a Christian, Arab Christian.
Where'd you live?
In Talbia. We had an apartment there. And the Arab landlord said, it was the Arab landlord, wasn't it?
We put somebody to put the...
Oh, yeah. He saw my radio, and he said, I think the Haganah would like to have the radio.
Oh, no, he didn't say it. Somebody came from the Haganah over
Yeah,
there.
he told the Haganah to come and get my radio. They took the radio, and they used it as a 2-way radio in Haganah headquarters. And Betty she'll tell you the story about how she worked on the radio.
It's a good thing you had it. Wow. So, you stayed at the Palestine Post through...
Till 1960.
Wow.
In 19... 1958, I get a call. I was sitting, it was just before Rosh Hashanah in 1958. I get a call from the stringer for Time magazine, who was working in Jerusalem at the time. He said, Marlin, I'd like you to take over for Time magazine, and I'll give you the cable address if they asked for any questions or want any stories, so I'd like you to do them. I said, look, Roy, his name is Roy. I said, Roy, I'm terribly busy at the moment. I can't possibly take it on. So he said, all right. I said, well, go to Al Rosenfeld of CBS. I think it was NBC. He said, ask him to do it.
Wait, was there a bureau chief here, or was
there was no bureau chief. It was just stringers.
Uh-huh.
They weren't that much interested in this country, or in the Middle East, actually. So early next morning, I get a call from Roy. He says, "Look, I can't find whom you told me to go to. Well, please just take the cable address. If they have any requests, just answer." I said, "Where are you going, Roy?" He said, "I'm going to the airport. I'm going to London." I said, "Why are you going to London?" He said, "Because my wife ran off with a British consul in Jerusalem, and I want to bring her back." I said, "Well, how long are you going for?" He said, "It'll take me about a month." You said, "Just about a month." He came back after 4 years. In the meantime, I got a request from Time, a cable from Time, asking me to cover an archaeological story near Beersheba. The very next day, I got that message, and so I didn't have anything particular to do that day. I ordered a taxi, and we drove down to Beersheba. I interviewed the archaeologist there, and I came back and I wrote the story, knocked out a story, and took it to the post office. That's how we sent our cables in those days, through the post office. And I didn't think anything of it. About 2 weeks later, I get a letter from Time magazine appreciating the fact that I did the story, and I did it they said I did it well, and they sent me a copy of the story, and they sent me a check. When I saw the check, my hair stood on it. That was my whole month's salary at the Jerusalem Post for 1 day's work. I said, wait a minute, this is a good thing. And then I started to send them suggestions for stories. And every suggestion I sent, they accepted. Because they weren't really covering this area. It was raw territory for them. And I would send them stories on back of the book stories, feature stories, not political. And I got so busy working for Time, I quit the Post. And I had I took on David Rubinger as a photographer, and I took 2 others to help me with my stories. And what I did was I built a stringer bureau.
And you took over the living room.
And I was busy like crazy doing stories for Time, and they appreciated it very much. And eventually I quit the Post and I went to work for Time.
I want to get back to Time in a second. I just wanted to see back to 48 for when the state was declared.
The state was declared on Friday night. I didn't know about it because we had no electricity, we had no radio, we had nothing. no food, no water, nothing. And the Saturday morning, I hear a knocking on the tree seam, on the shades of the bedroom, and it was Roy. Who was it?
It was Roy.
Yeah, it was Roy Elston. He had come back from England.
No, he was still there. Monica was with him. Before
Oh
is
yeah,
48.
Monica was still there. Yeah, Monty had left him later. Anyway, he knocked on the door. He said, "Marlin, wake up, wake up! They established a state it's called Israel." I woke up. I was hungry. I was tired. I said, "Okay, great idea." And then I went back to sleep. That's how I heard about the state of Israel.
Did you go back at all to the States at?
Oh, we went back about how many years later? 1968, 7. No,
1966.
1966.
You went back before.
But from when you came in 47,
Well, when your father died.
This-
you
I
went
w-
back.
Oh, we went back when my father
You
died,
went back in
1950, 51.
And then I
My
went
father
back.
had died. He was then only 51 years old.
But then we went back in 65, 66.
So I went back. We went back. Gee, I forgot all about that. We went back and we stayed for about how many? About 9 months, 8 months.
That was in 51.
Yeah. In the meantime, Agron was in America at the same time. He offered me a better job with the Post. He wanted to be the head of the news operation. I said, "No, I can't. I got to stay here." So I had to be with my mother for a while, and I worked in New York for a while for the JNF. But then in 52 we went back.
you meet any interesting people like as in your that you got a chance to interview, either people visiting here or any
The
politicians?
most interesting person I interviewed him several times, was Ben Gurion, David Ben Gurion. He was a wonderful visionary, magnificent person. I would interview him. He had his offices in the Jewish Agency building in those days. In 1956, I felt something was going on because men were disappearing from Jerusalem. So I went over to Ben Gurion's office and I sat outside the office, sat on the steps, and I was waiting for him to come out to find out what was going on. So finally, around 1 o'clock in the morning, he came out, and I said, "David, BG," we called him BG, "what's going on?" He said, "Let me worry about it. You go home and go to sleep. I'll take care of it." This was the beginning of the Sinai operation, October 29th, 1956. So you go home. Let me worry about it.
You called.
And then I would interview him in stable care. Every time Time wanted a story, there was something to do with Ben Gurion, I would go down to stable care, and that was later, much later.
You called him when you spoke to him. You called him BG.
BG, yeah, everybody called him BG.
I did not know that. Okay, so now you started now your time.
And then I interviewed BG and Eshkol, Sharet, Golda. I was very close to Golda, actually. I once sat in her office and I said, "Golda, you're smoking so much. Why do you smoke so much? Well, you get rid of it." She said, You know, Moshe, I won't die young from it. She was then about 80 years old.
I'm going to tell Dave, I don't know if you want the cover story at the time of Rosh Hashanah.
Oh. That was a story. What year was that? About 1969 or 70. I had done a good story for Time on an operation in Sinai. And it was just before Rosh Hashanah. It was actually the night of Rosh Hashanah. And I get a call. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning. Get a call from New York. This is what's his name?
You remember.
This is the editor-in-chief. I forget his name for a moment. The editor-in-chief at the time. I get a call from the editor, and he said, Marlin, we've got to change the cover of Time because Ralph Nader was planned for the cover, but we had to drop him because we had a big insert of General Motors, and he was against General Motors. We have a big ad running for General Motors, and we don't want to run Nader with General Motors in the cover. He said that we want to do a cover on Golda. This was Friday night, and the paper went to bed Saturday night.
That was Rosh Hashanah.
What?
But it was Erev Rosh Hashanah.
Erev Rosh Hashanah, Shabbat Erev Rosh Hashanah. He said, so I'd like you to interview Golda. I said, what was his name? Gershon, not Gershon.
No. It's with a G. His last name is with a G.
Anyway, he said, I'd like you to interview Golda. I said, do you know where Golda is right now? She's in her kibbutz in the Negev. I can't get to it's Erev Rosh Hashanah. She'd never seen me on Rosh Hashanah. He said, he was Jewish, by the way. And he said, anyway, you talk to the foreign editor, he'll call you up later. It was 3 o'clock in the morning. So I went back to sleep. I said, what can I do? So you're going to do a cover story on Golda. So about 7 o'clock in the morning, I get a call from the foreign editor. He'd tell me what he needed. So I called up. We had had my stringer bureau, and I had my secretary. I called her up and I said, send everything you have on the telex.
She's not Jewish.
She wasn't Jewish. Anyway, I said, send everything you have in the files on Golda. We had a big file on her. But it was all old stuff, nothing new. She said, well, I want to go to the beach in the morning. I said, no, you're staying here until you send everything. So she said, okay. So she did the job. And then I thought to myself, what the hell can I do? I just have to go to a synagogue and pray. So in the morning, I went to shul, and I was sitting and praying to help me because I needed the help to do a cover story on Golda. It was just what she wanted.
You didn't explain that you don't write. You didn't work on Shabbat.
And I didn't work on Shabbat. The only thing I did was answer the phone, but I never typed and didn't write. Anyway, so I'm sitting and praying, and somebody comes in and sits down next to me. Who is it? But Simcha Dinitz, who is the personal secretary of Golda. I said, Simcha, I got news for you. We're going to do a cover story on Golda. He said, I said, I need to talk to you about her. So we went back to the back of the synagogue, and we sat and we talked, and he talked and he talked, and he gave me wonderful information. But I couldn't write a word. I had to remember everything. So I thought to myself, what the heck am I going to do now? He talked to me for about an hour during service. So I went back to our apartment, and I thought to myself, maybe I'll call the material up. When I get to the door of my apartment, the telephone rings. When I get in, I lift the phone. I said, "Hello?" And he said, and the caller said, "This is John Shaw, a reporter in Italy." He said, "Marlin, I've heard your problem, and I know we're doing a story on Golda. Can you give me some material?" So I told him everything that Simcha told me.
Where did he hear the problem from?
What?
How did he know? He knew from
He
New
had a
York?
big bureau.
Oh.
He had a big bureau in Rome, and he heard. They probably told him. I don't know how he knew, but he knew. And I gave him all the material. I tried to remember everything that Simcha told me, and I did a good job of it. He said, "Okay, you'll have it. It'll be in New York in another hour." And he sat and he did the whole story from Rome to New York, what I had told him. So God answered me. Anyway, the next day was Shabbat, and no, it was Sunday. I got a call from New York. It was the second day of Rosh Hashanah. When I got home, the phone rang, and I answered the phone, and it was New York calling. He said, and the lady at the other end, she said, "I have the story that you wrote, and or that John Shaw wrote, or somebody wrote." He said, "I'm going to read you the whole story, and you'll see what mistakes are, what errors are." So I listened to for 1 hour, 1 or 2 hours, I think. I don't remember. I listened, and I corrected everything that was wrong, and she said she was happy with it, and the gold cover came out on that Monday.
Wow.
And God was happy.
You're talking about davening in shul.
Yeah. You covered, so you were saying before you covered the Eichmann trial?
Oh yeah, I did that for ABC
You were still working?
on television.
Oh,
I was working for Time, and I was also stringing for ABC, and we did television for the United States on the Eichmann trial. Well, that was really an experience. I would attend the trial every day, and it was a horrifying experience. And I would, after each session, I would stand in front of the cameras and tell them what happened, tell the American viewers what happened. Then one day, the cameraman and the radio man would put me in the courtyard there, and I would give my story. And then the sound man would say, "Wait, the sound wasn't right about that," and he wanted to change the sound. And then I wasn't standing right, so the cameraman would push me in another place. I said, "Wait a minute, this is about the Eichmann trial, the terrible things that happened." And I said, "This isn't reporting, this is entertainment. It's whatever." And I quit. I said, "I don't want to do it anymore."
but did you keep writing for Time? Or
Oh yeah, I did for Life and Time.
what about, did you work for any of the other agencies, the news?
In the War of Independence, I worked for United Press. And
Also work for them here, Marlin.
yeah, here in Jerusalem. I worked for United Press. And then later on, I also worked for the London Daily Mail. And I kept getting requests to do reports. There weren't that many American correspondents here.
Did anybody have a bureau here, or was it all Stringer?
I started the first bureau
At time.
at the time. And I think the New York Times was here. Maybe one or other.
What was it like working with David Rubinger?
Well, every time I had a story, I called up David and I said, David, we got another story to do. And I would keep suggesting stories and I would say, let's go do a story. Everywhere I went, I took Rubinger along to do pictures.
In '67?
But no, in 60.
Right, but in '67, was he still? Were you still working with him
Oh,
for
yeah.
the 6-Day War?
Yes,
or-
I did the 60. I remember once I suggested a story on doing what a scholar in Haifa worked out to be the Noah's Ark. Through all his research in the Midrashim and so forth, he figured out what the Noah's Ark was supposed to look like. So I suggested that to Time, and they accepted. So we went up to Haifa, and they had a little model of the boat. And Rubinger said, put it in the bathtub. So I put it in the bathtub full of water, put the boat, took a picture of it, and the picture came out looking like a huge boat. Noah's Ark. We did all kinds of stories on wild wheat, on where a camel stores its water. That was a good story. We also did a story on a kosher hotel in Tel Aviv. All these back of the book stories. But I also did political and military stories too.
What? How do you ever think about how things would have played out if you hadn't come to Palestine? Like what what your career would have looked like, or what?
Well, that would have meant that I couldn't have come with my wife because she was going to be here no matter what. So and we came together. No. I sometimes thought about what it would have been like. I would have gone to work for maybe Time magazine in New York. I don't know. I had no idea.
Any regrets that you have?
Absolutely not. Not at all. I made a career out of this, out of being here. This is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a foreign correspondent, and I chose to be here. And it fitted in with my Zionist ideals. So everything worked together.
So you do it all again?
Oh, yeah. Besides, I had Betty as an interpreter for me. She knew Hebrew from a very early age. And I'll tell you a little story about that. When we left New York, all our friends said we were being crazy to go now. Wait until things died down. Well, things never did die down. He said, wait until things, you're crazy, you're crazy. Thank you. So we got to Palestine, and we came on a bus to Jerusalem. And as I was sitting in the bus the very first morning, sitting in the bus, I looked out the window and I saw somebody, a young man on the street, looking at me and saying, "Idiot, idiot." And I said to Betty, "Look, they called us idiots in New York because we were here, and now they're calling us idiots here." She laughed. She said, "They're not calling you idiot. They're calling you Yidiot. He's trying to sell you a newspaper. He's Yidiot." But they didn't pronounce the Yud. Idiot, idiot.
How long did you work? When did you retire from?
I retired in about 1992. I was still writing for Time. I had gone in '76. They asked me to go to Boston to work for Time. The editor said, "You've been long enough here in Jerusalem. Now we'd like you to go to be in America for a while." So we packed our bags and we went to Boston. I was in the Boston Bureau for 4 years. And then they offered me a job to go to Washington, either Washington or Los Angeles. And I said, "No, I want to go back to Jerusalem." They said, "Well, in that case, we have a bureau there now, and we have a bureau there now, and you'll have to take early retirement." So in 1980, I took early retirement, but they said, we'd still like you to work for us. We'll give you so they gave me a contract to work for another 10 years. And actually it was 12 years. I was still doing stories in 1992. And finally I said, "I'm finished. I'm already old enough to retire, really retire." So
That's great. That's a fascinating story.
I said, so actually, I didn't want to stay in the States. I would have liked to have gone to Washington or Los Angeles and cover Hollywood and all the rest of it, or wherever it was. And but I said, Jerusalem is our home, and that's where we want to be.
Okay,
Now you
super. Thank you very much.
get a better story from her.
Yes.
זה אחד הצילומים שצילמתי.
כן. זה, אתה זוכר אבל באיזה סיטואציה זה? מה?
בוודאי.
מה?
זה היה ב-52.
כן.
ויצמן נפטר בדצמבר.
כן.
וכל הכנסת הישן,
כן.
בקינג ג'ורג', כל הכנסת יצאו. זה אני מראיין את בן גוריון, שניהם.
כן.
רובינגר צילם את זה.
כן.
והם יצאו כדי לקבל את בן צבי, יצחק בן צבי, כדי להגדיר אותו.
אוקיי.
אז גולדה, זה שפרינצק יושב בפנים, קדימה.
כן.
יש גולדה, יש... זה מהאוניברסיטה שלי.
כן.
Levy, that's Sandy's brother. And these are two other cousins, and this is my sister Miriam in the back. But I didn't even notice it. Yeah, Peleg, I think, was the last picture. התמונות שהרצה משם. Marlin,
What?
where's our album?
ממתי זה? זה from where?
שני לפברואר.
This is the
48.
this is the paper they put out
Yeah.
after the bombing.
אוקיי.
David Courtney. Wait, didn't it, that was not his real name, right?
His real name is Roy Elston.
Okay.
Roy Olsen was his name for when he wrote.
No, he wrote
Oh,
under
it was
David
David
Courtney.
Courtney, that's right.
וואו.
I remember when he wrote this. The truth is louder than TNT and burns brighter than the flames of mercy.
Mom, where's our family album? Is that the green one up?
From time to time.
We should interview him.
כן.
And next to her is Moshe, what's his name?
יש את זה באלבום שדיברת.
כן. מדהים.